Okay, I think everybody is in. That's going to be in at the beginning. So let's go ahead and get started. Today we have Arya and we have Francis, and I will let them mostly describe the nature of their relationship. That way they can describe it however they would like. But so why don't you tell us a little bit about how you met and who you are to each other?
Do you want to start, Francis, or do you want me to start?
Oh, really? I should say Arya is my boo, and just for people who haven't seen the other videos, and she is sociopathic identifying. So now go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So Francis and I met our senior year of high school. Initially, I didn't really think of it as that I had a crush or anything. It was more that I was wholly interested in Francis. That did eventually become a relationship for 5 odd years, off and on. I don't really think of her as my ex anymore. I think of her more as my friend, and a very good friend that I have a lot of time spent with. I don't know if you would agree with that, Francis, but that's kind of
Yeah,
how I think of it.
I would agree with every part of that. I think it, in a way, it feels like cheap or incorrect to think of you as an ex at this point. Just somebody that's very important to me that I did have a relationship with at one point, but that doesn't any longer really feel like the most accurate identifier for our relationship. Yeah.
Yes. So Francis, what kind of things would you say kind of tipped you off to any kind of like sociopathic behavior, or were there any ways in which it helped our relationship instead of hurting it?
Yeah, I would say I some of the immediate things that stood out to me that even led me to learn more about sociopathy, and think that that might be a a good word to describe you, came from some stories that you had told me about like your childhood and adolescence. Also the fact that you were very charming. I could see your capacity to use that to manipulate people from time to time. But the fact that you could kind of turn it on and off, like whenever you needed to. And sometimes not as often, but the like lying about things, often what I thought were kind of inconsequential things. Those were the first things that led me to look into sociopathy more, and then I think ended up learning more about it in that way. But then the ways in which I think that was maybe beneficial or like influential on our relationship, any artistic endeavors or any sort of like learning endeavors that we participated in together, I thought were really constructive. I always appreciated that if I was working on a piece of writing and I asked for your feedback, you could give me constructive and critical feedback, whereas most of the rest of my friends, they'd go, "Oh, it's so good," which is not helpful and usually not all the way true. So I always really appreciated you for that. And it was always just exciting to learn about things together because you were just such an encyclopedia about things. And I noticed often people could not keep up and just also couldn't sometimes summon the amount of enthusiasm that you had for things that you really were interested in. And so that was always, it was kind of electric to talk to you about those topics that were interesting to you or that you were currently learning about, because there was just seemingly no end to the wealth of knowledge that you had about them. And I just always enjoyed having discussions about those things.
Well, yesterday we talked a little bit about impulsivity, right? That you consider yourself an impulsive person. I think a lot of people would think that's like recipe for a disaster in a relationship, but I think in a lot of ways it worked for us, right? Because you could keep up with me. In fact, I think you enjoyed some of the excitement and unpredictability. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but would you agree that that's true?
I do. And I think You know, growing up, I lived in a very strict household. I feel like a lot of my more impulsive and risk-seeking behaviors were muted out of necessity to appease my parents. And so when we first started spending time together, I remember not really knowing how to not how to deal, but like what to do with your ability to just like take whatever actions you were interested in taking at the time without a whole lot of regard for what other people needed or wanted out of you, but also like doing things just for the sake of the excitement or the thrill of it. And so I think that taught me how to come out of my shell a little bit more and kind of unlock these parts of me that had always been there, but had been pretty repressed. Like most of the time I was down for whatever like impulsive, like crazy fun thing that came across the table, and you know, like kind of taking a trip somewhere on a whim, or like doing that type of thing. So yeah, I do think that was always exciting for me.
Yeah. Yesterday you mentioned like an adjustment period near the beginning of our relationship. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
And just how it relates to thrill-seeking behavior.
Sure. So I remember when we first started dating, some of the things that you would do just for the sake of the thrill of it, I didn't really know how to handle it. And I also didn't know sometimes like what right or what responsibility I had to intervene if I thought the choices you were making in saying something or doing something like that you might regret them later. And so if that ended up happening, then I would feel guilty in some way that like I should have talked to you about it. But I don't feel like at the beginning maybe I knew you well enough to know what those limits were. Because you didn't seem to have the limits of like what like when is too far, what is too much. So that was a bit of an adjustment, and then just learning like what I was comfortable with too, like learning how to say no to you if I didn't want to be part of something. Took me a very long time to figure out, I think.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the like taking responsibility for me, or when to kind of step in and give me some guidance, you said yesterday that you felt sometimes protective over me. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think that was always the case, but I think honestly this might seem counterintuitive to some people, but like after we had discussed the fact that you might be a sociopath, and I don't think when I first learned about it and I didn't really understand it, I think I was probably prone to some of the negative stigmas that exist around sociopathy. But then quickly learning more about what it actually is and what it actually means to be a sociopath, like I just kind of saw that as being part of who you were. And so things that you engaged in, like I felt sometimes like I was always at the ready to like jump in for like if there were any negative repercussions to the things that you did, I wanted to like shield you from those, which you know is neither here nor there about like whether that was a good idea or not. Or like sometimes like talking about how people couldn't keep up with you in conversations or in situations that you were in. Like if I ever felt like somebody was giving you a hard time about it, I would feel the need to like get really defensive and jump in and be like why can't you keep up? Like that's not her problem, that's your problem.
yes like I was always adapting to them, but they were not adapting to me quite as well, I think, as you did. And were able to keep me very interested. I
tried, and you know that was a struggle sometimes too, because I think there were days where I would be content to just like hang out and just like you'd be like, what are we doing today? And like, well, this is what we're doing, like we're just being here together. And the days that wasn't enough, I didn't always really know what to do, you know, because I think I was always quick to blame myself for that,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't any more really my fault than it was your fault. It just was that some days we had different levels of like what was necessary for us to be content, you know, and my
Mm-hmm.
threshold was often lower than yours was. And so then I would be like, I'm fine. I don't know what you need from me or what I need to do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, surprise everyone, we broke up. You described it yesterday, Frances, as kind of you reached a critical breaking point. And I mostly just want to touch on that to emphasize the kind of transformations you went through after the breakup and kind of what led us to being friends eventually. You said that you started to take things personally and it slowly manifested into a critical breaking point. Do you want to describe that at all?
Yeah, I think like what I was just describing about feeling a need to like perform or like to do things so that I don't know how to word this. I guess I was selfishly just like very fixated on feeling inadequate, whether that was something that you were explicitly expressing to me or not. I, at the time, was a much more unstable person than I am now. I was very impulsive. I took things very personally. So it didn't take very much. Just like even a day when you seemed like more distant or colder to me, I think as that happened over time, I retreated more, and then that drove more of a distance between us. And so that was kind of the buildup that happened. So I had to spend a lot of time after we broke up kind of walking through in my head what I wanted to focus on about myself, or what I wanted to change about myself when I was kind of reflecting on how things had ended. So spent some time just trying to get to a better place and not make such destructive decisions for myself, and to not be so affected by other people's opinions of me or what I thought their opinions of me were. So did you want to touch on like how we got back in touch again? Did you want me to talk about that
Yeah,
too?
I think that's a really important thing at this juncture. So after Frances and I broke up, I don't think that we spoke for maybe, 2 years?
It was about 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah. I moved to a different city. I was in various relationships, but like I've always expressed to Frances, I have not experienced guilt thus far in my life, but I have experienced immense regret, right? And one of these regrets was kind of leaving things as I did with you, Frances, coldly, as if maybe you never existed at all. So when I was preparing to move to the city Emmy lives in, I did not want that bridge burned. So I reached out to Frances and asked her if she would like to meet up, talk. I didn't really know what she might do. I even thought that maybe the action itself was self-serving, right? Self-congratulatory. I'm like, well, I'm the one that's trying to make up. I'm the one that's trying to be friends. I'm taking the high road. And I was kind of worried that your reaction would be as such. But instead, you were super open to meeting up. And I think we were both equally nervous about that meeting. What did you think about it? Were you nervous, apprehensive, anything like that?
All of that. Yeah. We hadn't said a word to each other in 2 years. And then I just remember being at work and seeing your name come up on my phone. I just instantly, before even reading the message, I was wondering, like, is this, I had no idea. I couldn't fathom that you would want to meet up and to see me again before you moved. And so I couldn't get over when we met up that day. And you mentioned to me over the course of us talking, you said, Like, I wasn't sure that you were going to want to see me. And I had such a just epiphany at that point of just, because I had felt the exact same way. Like, I almost, I had contemplated not doing it because I was worried that you felt the need to like have it out one more time about things, and that you didn't really want to see me. And so it was just so relieving, because I realized in that moment that for everything that had happened and all of the hurt that we may have caused each other near the end of our relationship, that what's important is really where everything started, and just that, like, you're a very important person to me, and I feel like there's kind of this weird cosmic connection between us, which I'm not even sure if I believe in, but the more things that come up, I don't know, I just feel like it was good to know that you didn't hate me, and that we had both grown a lot in the 2 years that we hadn't spoken to each other, which again, it was just very relieving. That was something that I wanted for both of us. So.
Were you surprised that I decided to undertake this emotional endeavor with you? I think most people would imagine, most of my exes at least, that it was kind of like ghost, and then we don't think about each other again. So did it surprise you at all that I was like receptive to the emotional reactions we would have to each other when we met up?
Yeah, I think so, which, you know, after knowing you for so long, I guess I had fully expected, after us not speaking for 2 years, that we would never speak again, which I was really upset about, but I had just sort of resolved myself to that. And so that was really surprising to see that you had spent a lot of time like reflecting, and that you were receptive to the emotions that I was expressing to you when we met up that day, about like how I felt and the things that I regretted. That was surprising to me. But I could tell that you had changed just by seeing you that day. I don't know. I didn't have any plans to go into any of that when we met up. It was just, I was expecting kind of a, like, all right, tie this up, bon voyage, good luck on your next chapter. But instead, I felt like I could be vulnerable enough with you to share some of those feelings with you, and have you be receptive to them and not get upset about it. And that was great. That was really refreshing. And it was something that I think I had needed to do for a long time, and just didn't realize it, because I didn't think it would be a possibility.
Right. Yeah. So after we met and forgave each other, we continued to text all through the years, whatever. Did that surprise you, Frances, that we decided to keep trying to forge a friendship?
Yeah, I mean, on my end, I felt open to doing that, but I felt like that day had gone very well, but I wasn't entirely convinced that was it, you know, like that we could just have an amicable friendship. So I was hesitant to take the first step in trying to continue being friends after that. And so I was very pleasantly surprised to hear from you again. And I think you went about it in a really good way, just to like mention something that you had been reading or that you had been watching, very low stakes, not like, hey, let's approach this really like fundamental issue between the two of us from 4 years ago or whatever, which obviously you weren't going to do, but it helped ease back into that, and I think make that friendship possible to start with like some less consequential topics.
Yes. For me, it was a relief to know that we were not only merciful and forgiving of each other, but that we were able to see each other as complex individuals, which I wasn't always great at doing, you know. But fast forward, we went on a, Emmy and I and two other sociopaths that we've met, went on a road trip together. Frances and her sister were also taking a vacation together to Seattle. And it turns out that we were, both parties were going to be in Seattle at the same time. So we decided to, at the very least, meet up and go to a museum together. Frances and I have a lot of musical interests in common. Do you want to talk about that at all, Frances? Speaking of the cosmos, right? It'd be very hard to not see it as like we schemed it or something or planned this.
Yeah, it's stuff like that situation that keep me wondering, like, if there is some like larger pattern or something to things. And yeah, we had just barely really started talking again, and it just completely by coincidence happened that Emmy and Aria were there at the same time as my sister and I, not to mention even like bumped into each other prior to our plans to meet up with each other, which it's just incredibly strange. But yeah, that was really nice too, to be able to like to spend time together that day, and especially like in the presence of, like you said, some of our common interests in music and like pop culture and that type of thing was great. And really great to meet Emmy and just to see both of you together as well. So yeah, I was a little nervous about that, because it was the first time that we would be like spending more than a coffee together. Yes. But I think after that day, I was fully convinced of like, okay, this is a friendship that can work and can be good for both of us. And like, yeah, so I didn't know if there's anything.
And then a couple questions I thought about last night. One, were you at all nervous to, or apprehensive, I guess, in Seattle to spend time with not just the sociopath you know, but 3 others? Or did you feel as though I could protect you misbehavior or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the thought had at least crossed my mind. I was like, I'm just about to meet up with like 3 sociopaths that I don't know and 1 that I do know. But like, I won't say that I was ever like fearful or anything, but I remember, I don't think I realized that I was more than just like baseline nervous about it until I got in the car with you guys, and I almost had to just laugh to myself because I just felt this weight fall off of me. And like, I don't know why I was stressed about this at all. Like, like your people, and I trusted you enough to not like be putting me into a situation that would be uncomfortable or unhealthy for me. And so yeah, I guess I was probably more nervous about it than I realized, but then after spending 5 minutes with everybody was like, yeah, these are also just people. You know, the trap that I think empaths fall into sometimes with people with antisocial personality disorder, like it's the you know, the big bad. And,
yeah, that's right.
Just like we're all people.
Yeah. So another thing, you know, we've talked a lot about sense of self together, right? And Frances and I were very young and kind of came into adulthood in our relationship. And I certainly had identity problems, but like, did you have them too? I mean, I always detected that you did, but now when I talk to you, I see you more as this complex person that has more things figured out than before. So would you say that like when we were together that your sense of self was a little muddled? Would you
Yeah, I think my sense of self is still something I'm working on, but I'm light years ahead of where I was when we were together. And so I was very susceptible to just, I just wanted everybody to like me, and I wanted to do whatever I needed to do to make people like me. And obviously, the two most obvious consequences of that are that as soon as there are conflicting interests involved, when two different people want two different things from you, you've already reached an impossible task, let alone the fact then that you're not spending any time trying to figure out what is most meaningful and what are the things that are important to you, and like, do you have principles that guide your decision making? Do you have like any sort of like compass of like ethics or morality, or even just as simple as like interests? So I definitely think I'm a happier person for having spent some time trying to figure that out, even though you know, a journey and not a destination I've arrived at. But I think that was a inherently a recipe for friction, at the least, in a relationship, to have two people just with really weak to non-existent sense of self to be put into any situation together. So
yes, I think our problems with our sense of self, I think, did translate into our relationship. You know, having been together as long as we did, we took breaks, we have broken up here and there, but we never really had great labels of those things, right? I've always been uncomfortable with labels. Like, I'm not sure that I would even still label our relationship as a gay relationship, right? Everybody else around us is like, oh, you're with a girl now, and this is such a big deal. But did it ever seem like a big deal to you? I mean, I never thought of myself as a lesbian or bisexual, and I didn't think of you that way either. You know, everything was just fluid enough that I think it confused other people around us too, you know?
Yeah, I've never really thought about it like that, but I would agree with that. My sexuality has always been something that I've thought about, I guess, but like never felt the need to pin it down. And I think that was especially apparent in our relationship, because I think there was a fluidity to our sexuality. And also for myself, at least, like where gender is involved, I don't think I necessarily adhere to many gender norms, and that had its own sense of fluidity to it as well. So I've never really thought about that, but I would agree with that. Yeah.
Do you think it's interesting now that we do assign a label to our relationship, and that is friends, right? I would not refer to you as my ex or like my bisexual friend, for example, you know, specifically friends, right? So I think that having those kind of labels now, at least for me, definitely helps me to respect the boundaries of other people. So I think that if I hadn't had that ability now, we would not be able to be friends. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think I think thinking of you as my friend and not as my ex was a huge mental turning point for me, and being able to have a healthy relationship with you with boundaries, a healthy friendship, because there's a lot of implications and baggage that comes with being someone's ex. And while a lot of those things are still there, I think there's more inherent intention and boundaries in thinking of you and referring to you as my friend. You know, that I am interested in maintaining this relationship with you because you are someone that I'm interested in spending time with and talking to, and not because there's any sort of unresolved feelings or like unfinished business from a relationship.
Yeah. That makes sense. Obviously, I think it's hard for a lot of people to believe that we're friends. Do you think that any of my like more sociopathic characteristics makes it easier to be friends with me post breakup, or do you think in some ways it's harder?
No, I would say if anything, it probably has made it easier.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly, and I don't know specifically like which characteristics are just like you and which ones are more like a product of sociopathy, but I think that like once you were able to find like forgiveness for me on your end, that you don't really care if people find it strange that we're friends now. And
Right.
so that kind of empowered me to embrace that for myself as well. And I think I had mentioned this yesterday, like when I'm in a relationship with somebody now, and when I was going to meet up with you and Emmy, I had told him that it was that was going to be happening, and I remember him asking if I was asking him or telling him. And I thought about it, and I thought that, you know, me years ago might never have made that call because he wouldn't have known anyway, or I might have acted like I was asking him but then doing it anyway if he said no, that he was uncomfortable with it. So I told him that I was telling him, and just I felt like you know, that I was empowered to do that by a lot of things that I have learned from you, like to not apologize for being who you are and the things that you want out of life and the decisions that you make. And while sometimes that can go too far one way, I think I have learned that a lot from you specifically. So yeah, that's definitely been hugely helpful, I would say. And also that you don't feel any need to make it emotional. I would worry about that with somebody else. I think that like at some point the other shoe's gonna drop and we're gonna have to rehash all of it. But like I think there was just a clear like intent and understanding going into this friendship that like we both know what happened. We've worked through that on our own time. I would like to be friends. Like, can we do that? And the boundary in doing that is that like there's not going, I just trust that there's not going to be a point where we need to get into that again. I don't worry about that. Like I'm just focused on the friendship itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got about 3 minutes left, but something I wanted to, something you brought, Patti Smith's, I don't even know you'd say novel, Just Kids. And I know this is something, you've mentioned it to me several times over the years, right? That this seems to be an important quote for you. And it is, I think, an artistic endeavor that we underwent together. I think we both read it and we're kind of mutually obsessed with it. Do you want to read that quote and kind of like describe why you've used it with me so frequently?
Yeah, so I think I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but she's in her book, she's talking about her relationship and friendship with Robert Mapplethorpe, and that Robert was always a good kid trying to be bad, and Patti always felt like she was a bad kid trying to be good. And that really resonated with me because I feel like my whole life, my tendencies have been towards the impulsive and sometimes the destructive, or if nothing else, just like devious, sometimes things that don't have any strong consequences, but it's not what I'm supposed to do. But like I said, my whole childhood and adolescence, I suppressed that really hard and just tried to be the exact child that my parents wanted me to be. And you being who you are, were able to unlock that a little bit and make me feel more comfortable in not always being a bad kid, but there's some fun to being a bad kid sometimes, you know, and it doesn't always have to be things of great consequence, but like sometimes to do things just because you're not supposed to do them, and that's okay.
Absolutely.
So I always,
we've got less than a minute. Oh, sorry.
No,
we've got less than a minute. I don't know if there's any questions, anything we want to answer?
I mean, I think you guys did a great job. I want to thank Frances because you guys didn't touch upon this, but Frances is the reason actually that Arya and I met. Frances was the one who suggested to Arya that she might be a sociopath. and to read my book. And I think Arya didn't read it for a long time still. And then when we met the first time, she still kind of was like blasé about the whole thing. But then she came out the second time, and then things are different now, I guess, is the best way to put it. So thank you, Frances, for that. And yes, a future call perhaps. And then thank you for being with us today. And thank you everybody else for being with us today. And we're out of time, but we're not going to have it next week. We're going to have it the week after because I'm on vacation. So I'll see everybody later. Have a good day.
Bye.